Okay, question and answer number 4. Sorry about that, the dog was barking. This is home learning for you. So basically, going on about Liz Morden, yes, she represents being a child who was encouraged into crime through her family and poverty. In Act 2, Scene 2 is great monologue, Scene 1, great monologue, where she is suspected within the colony to have stolen as well. And so she goes on trial. And she is chained at that time, and unfortunately during the earlier time in Australia they still did the same thing of hanging, so she's been tried to be hung. She is innocent, and we realise that as the play goes on, but at the time she is trying to explain her life in a monologue, which is very moving, and it shows how she has no hope. She doesn't believe in the criminal justice system. She is a victim as a child who was abused, who was encouraged by her parents. She started on in theft. She was even sort of encouraged into prostitution, and this was the people that should have been protecting her, her family. So it's very important monologue, that, because it helps you connect with one of the more brutal criminals, but actually empathize with why she is in that circumstance, and it was through absolute desperation. So how she would be portrayed would be to show the rawness of the character, the rawness of her circumstances. It's a very hard monologue to understand because there's a lot of Cockney slang, and a lot of terms that were used in the period. Again, you can identify that in this historical resource. Very well put together, but we will go through that monologue specifically when we are back in the classroom. So Amy also said she was interested in the debate about the purpose of civilization and the different attitudes of the Greeks and the Romans, which they refer to, Philip talks about in Scene 6. So basically, Philip talks about how a society is constructed and how a society effectively develops. And the Greeks and the Romans had two different ways. The Romans were very much into let's build roads, let's build walls, let's build castles, and it was all infrastructure. Whereas the Greeks built amphitheatres, which were theatres, and it was law. As a citizen, you had to go to the theatre, and that's why when you travel around the world, you'll see these big amphitheatres. They're huge, and thousands of people sit around and watch a play, and they considered it a human law that everyone should go to the theatre, because the Greeks believed that creating a civilized society was about educating them, language, debate, discussion, entertainment. So you can see Philip's viewpoint come through the Greeks' argument, and you know, there's a lot of argument to be said that is a very good way to develop a civil, rational, educated society. So I got confused between Ketch and Harry, both executioners. Yes, obviously Harry was much more the leader. He would be the one to instruct, but he was haunted by the hangings that he produced. And there's a reason for that, because the character of Harry is based on a true character that existed, and he actually committed and was involved in embezzlement and theft. And Captain Philip saw a lot of potential with him and felt he could be reformed, and took him under his wing and got him instructed into the Navy and kept him as his right-hand man. So what we see with Harry is a lot of guilt, because he's not sure if he should be treated like a convict, but equally he's been given this opportunity from Captain Philip. So he's in turmoil about where he exists, and he is haunted by the people he's instructed to be hung in the past. And he also is alcoholic. So with that in mind as well, it adds to his deterioration, because he doesn't think clearly, he's very haunted, he's in turmoil. As for Ketch, Ketch was the actual executioner, and he was Irish, and in the time there was a lot of racism, in particular to Jewish people and Irish people. And so he's seen as quite negatively by the other convicts as well. And he's like, I want to be in the play, I want to be an actor. And the reason he wants to be an actor, he's witnessed people adore actors, and he just wants to be loved. He's a very tragic character, and I can't help but have a real sense of empathy. Although he's been part of the hanging, he doesn't want to do that. He wants to be loved. He's instructed to do it. So we have two different characters there. Amy also says, I really like the scene about Mary and Wisehammer when they talk about language. How should this be effectively performed? Well, if you look in the play at Act 1, Scene 10, there is a hell of a lot of subtext. Basically, Wisehammer is educated, and some of the convicts were educated. Some of them were actually done for theft, and they were actually clerks, they were accountants. So he is actually quite an educated convict, and he loves words. And in Act 1, Scene 10, he's talking about the beauty of language. He talks, there's a lovely one where he talks about how if you put in front of a word, it turns it upside down, it changes the meaning. So you can have justice, which is such a beautiful word. It's about equality, it's about values and rights. But as soon as you put injustice, it's evil and it's negative. And he talks about those, and it's a lovely word. But he actually is wooing Mary here. He admires her. She can write. She too loves words, and he's trying to really desperately connect with her. And he says things like, you have a beautiful hand. Now, actually, a hand, you can refer to somebody writing, but there's subtext in he admires her physical being as well, her hands. So, he's really trying to compliment her and woo her. There's lots of words in there, and he's really trying to connect with her there, and he is the sort of competitor for Mary's love. So I think when you say how would this be performed, it's quite tender, it's very close. I can imagine Mary sitting, maybe leaning on a crate. She could actually write, so she was asked, they didn't have photocopies, asked to rewrite the play out, and I can imagine him moving during the scene closer and closer to her to admire her writing, but really he just wants to be physically close to her. And I think that should be quite sensitively done. So another final question is, I think the scene where Harry is drunk and most haunted by Thomas Barrett, a young boy, is really sad. I think we could talk about how this would be performed effectively. This monologue is so difficult. And I just spoke about Harry and how he's in turmoil. And basically, if you read in here, if you get this book on page 53, I've already noted it down, it says about how it should be performed. So let me read a bit here. Oh no, that's the wrong one, page 53. So basically, Harry Brewer is a large and complex character, and this monologue can be tricky for actors. Ian, this is the actor, dived into it in the first rehearsal, throwing himself on the floor. I felt the only way to approach it was to jump in and do it badly. Then if it wasn't acceptable, I'd bring it back. That's what the actor said. One has to remember that the stakes for the convicts and office were exceptionally high in this new and strange colony on the other side of the world. And this this section really shows Harry's alcoholism and his hallucinations. And this is what the actor says. Play him as someone who's trying to be sane, he advises. It's like trying to play drunk. You don't play drunk, you play someone who's trying to be sober. Harry doesn't see himself as being mad at all, but the stakes are much higher than any normal fears or anxieties. So you can't play someone who's slightly drunk saying, I'm quite scared about Hungry Breaker. He is actually terrified. So basically, the actor played different voices. And again, it's something we can experiment with class and actually give the characters different. So he's really impersonating the characters in this play, and they have to have different accents, different tones, different pitches, because Thomas Barrett was actually quite a young male, so maybe a higher pitch, whereas when Harry's speaking it's much lower. So you hear the actor having all these voices in his head. So Danny asked the question, which of the officers exactly for and against the convicts? Which one dislikes them? Which one actually sees them as needing to be reformed? Now, I'm not going to answer that question because that's in a task that you're going to do in future, and we're going to try and use Max Stafford Clark's playing cards idea to find out where their bias is. So I'm going to leave that question. I think, Danny, I've answered your question about why Harry sees all the ghosts. You know, it's because these are people he's hung. He's haunted by it because he feels like maybe he should have been hung. He was saved by Captain Phillip. And you also asked about the Aborigine, and in the earlier one I spoke about him, and it looks at colonialisation. That's the whole purpose, about one culture inflicting themselves on another. Then I think I've covered Lucy's questions. Adam, you asked what characters based on real people. So I've said a majority of them. But if you want to actually look specifically, get this, because it will tell you in detail. There's a whole section on the characters, and they'll tell you about all the characters and how they were produced. Then Adam said, why was the Aborigine not involved more? That's a good question. He was only involved 4 times in the play, but I think really the reason why he wasn't more was there wasn't much of a relationship between the Aborigine and the convicts. It was apparently the way colonies developed all the way around Australia in the end, and the Aborigines were sort of forced into the centre, out of the way of the shores, which were great ports for the military. And there wasn't much of a relationship, well, definitely not a positive relationship. So the Aborigines sort of gathered themselves away from the shorelines. But also the play is much more about a micro society. This play is about a new world, a new colony, and all the way through it debates how we produce a good society. And that's what the playwright wants to look at. This micro, tiny, not macro, this micro society, how it's established, on what principles, on what viewpoints. And she's suggesting that even in chaotic times of recession or difficulties in society, theatre should be the key to establishing identity, culture, education. And so she's really sending out a message to the government. Did Aborigines work with convicts in the past? Not really. I said they were all quite separate. So I'd like to thank you for your questions. I hope they helped you with your understanding, and I hope you've had the opportunity to write up some of these comments. I have to remind you of a few things, that this play is an epic theatre play. There are messages, try and avoid themes, messages that the playwright and the company and the director are putting out to the audience. They want them to think about colonies and think about how cultures inflict their cultures on other cultures. They want to show you how valuable education is. They want you to look at how prisoners and people who are having a negative experience or seen negatively in society, how they can be educated and how theatre can reform. So it's all very educational. Therefore, the genre of this play is not a history play. Don't think it's just recreating. It's not. It's using that parable, that time, in order to show society now. So the genre of the play is didactic. In other words, it's educational, but more so dialectic. It creates a debate. But also, I'd like to say there is naturalistic acting within it, and there's a reason for that. You see, some of the characters are very meaningful and deep, and we get to know them and we empathise and we sympathise with them, and it's because it's looking at how we create civilians and people. So there are some naturalistic style acting. Some of the characters can be quite demonstratory, they can be quite epic theatre gestic acting, such as Sideway, being the melodramatic character that he is, or Shitty Meg, the stereotype prostitute. There are certain characters that you can convey in that sort of epic theatre style of acting, But you have to have that sense of naturalistic acting within an epic play to show how people can be reformed. So it's used for that purpose. So I look forward to seeing your notes on all the question and answers. And obviously, if anyone has any questions or answers needed over the coming weeks, please email me, and I look forward to seeing you in the classroom, hopefully in not too long. Take care.